So hello and welcome everyone to this webinar. Today it's about the changes that are going to take effect for Cyber Essentials. The changes aren't actually coming in until the 27th of April 2026, but this gives a good preparation for those changes. So today I'll be going through the different changes, what impacts will they have, and how to ensure that you stay compliant. We will be having a Q&A session at the end as well, so you can use the chat function throughout the webinar. So any questions that you've got, if you just put them in the chat function, and then once we get to the end, I'll then go through them. This is probably going to be about 15 minutes, I would imagine, roughly, depending on different variances. And then, as I say, we'll do the Q&A session at the end. There's my details as well, so if you did want to get hold of me, I will bring those up later on. So the changes, what are they? So as I said, they go live on the 27th of April 2026. The 5 core control areas stay the same. So the main scheme is exactly the same, but it's going to get much stricter on things like multi-factor authentication, patching, scoping, and accountability. So this is not a full rewrite. It's still using the same original framework, but it's just going to be judged differently. They're basically getting a lot sharper on it. So if we look at the age of the scheme, so Cyber Essentials in itself, it was launched in June 2014. And when they launched it, they kind of knew that they needed to do something, but they weren't exactly sure how they were going to do it, how they were going to pull the framework in, and then how were they going to make it relevant to all the different, whether it's UK businesses or businesses across the world. The main body of Cyber Essentials is IASME, which is IASME. They're the sole delivery partner on behalf of the UK government. So they've come up with the rule change. It's essentially their certification that they do. So if ever I talk about IASME, they are the body that runs Cyber Essentials for the UK government. So, and as I say, they've really changed their approach on some of the critical questions that they've come up with. So essentially, the approach is, before, you could have critical questions that you would essentially fail on, but you wouldn't necessarily fail the certification. They've really tightened it up in this new version, and essentially now they become an automatic failure, whereas before they wouldn't, and you could review it and some would fail, some wouldn't. They've got a lot stricter in their approach now, so they will just be a hardline failure on certain questions that you answer. Again, this is really pushes back to when Cyber Essentials first come out, kind of anyone could do it. It might take them longer to do, and they might sort of fudge their way through it. But depending on which platform they were using, they could answer a question wrong, but then they could go back and change or tweak the answer or maybe fix it, and then they would still pass it. Whereas now there's going to be a lot more automatic failures within the accreditation. So essentially, the scheme is shifting from what they've said is from a close enough to approve it or fail approach. Which really I think is going to be a good thing. It's just obviously a bit of a learning curve for if companies are doing it themselves, but also a company like Syn-Star, where we do a lot of Cyber Essentials accreditations for our clients. It's just going to be a slight different way of doing some of the questions. So, right, so if we look at, well, first of all, MFA, this is the big one. This is the big headline that they're changing. So multi-factor authentication, two-factor authentication, essentially they're a similar, the same thing. But now they've got really hard line on it, and you've either are using MFA or you're going to fail. So their lining is, if a cloud service offers MFA, you must now use it. If you do not, and it is available, whether it's free, included, or paid for, this is an automatic fail. So an example of this is, let's look at Microsoft 365. When 365 really started to come out big, let's say around 2015-ish, They did actually have multi-factor authentication built into it in the back end somewhere, but by default it was switched off and it was a kind of a nice to have. Then as we approached more the kind of 2020, then it become much more, well, you really should have it, but it was still switched off by default. And then around the early 2020s, 2021, Microsoft changed it and did it by default, it's on. So when you set up a new user, you'd have to set up multi-factor authentication, but you could switch it off. Effectively, what they've now said is that if any of your, I mean, they state cloud providers, but if it is software that you're actually running yourself that is hosted and available online, then you need to have multi-factor authentication. The only way around it is if you can prove that multi-factor authentication is being used somewhere else within the login process, or that provider does not offer MFA. So there's obviously not that many now but that you might have some older legacy software. And again, it's just the wording that you use to explain why MFA isn't being used or can't be used. And this is the big thing. But if it is available and you say no, it will automatically fail. So, so for example, for things like Microsoft 365, you might have an accounts package like Sage or Zero, a CRM system, payroll system, a backup. They will all have, because they're relatively modern software platforms, they'll all have MFA. You need to go in and switch it on for every single user. And as I say, if you don't have it on for every user, you will fail by default. The second big thing is around patching critical software and hardware. So at the moment, there are two new self-assessment questions that have become auto fail points, high risk or critical security updates for, and this is where we need to really look at what are the updates, because ultimately some packages you use, you might not be in control of the updates. That's the provider. But what they specifically said is security updates for operating systems. So that's things like Windows 11. If you're a Mac user, if you've got a server, so a Microsoft server, again, any critical updates, not all updates, but critical ones, must be patched within 14 days. Also, if you've got important network hardware, so routers, firewalls, their firmware needs to be updated, as long as, again, it's the critical part. With all operating systems, there'll be lots of smaller patches and things. And obviously, from our perspective as a cybersecurity partner, we would always want everything to be up to date, but it's the critical ones where you will automatically fail through Cyber Essentials if you don't have them set up. So, but as I say, as soon as a release date comes through, you need to patch it within 14 days or you'll fail. This is where weak patching processes get exposed. So when we say weak, this is if you don't have fully managed updates and patches being done by whether it's yourself and you're self-administering it, or whether you've got an IT partner. This is where essentially if you're leaving it to the users to select whether they want to run updates or not, this is where it could really become a difficult process to try and pass Cyber Essentials, because essentially you need to be able to state that all critical patches have been done and are going to be done within the future. So again, you may need to invest in certain patch management software. It really depends on your setup, what technology you're using. When I say technology, we're talking about the hardware and the software. If you're using Microsoft 365, for example, then most of the security patches and updates will be done by them. But the device itself that you're using, that's, let's say, Windows 11, you're responsible for pushing those updates and patches. So, and what they've really spoken about in their annual conference, they were really talking about this fuzzy questions and fuzzy answers, and it's very similar actually with cyber insurance. They're just getting a lot sharper on exact meanings of things. So scoping is now a lot clearer and harder to dodge. So organizations must justify exclusions, And the old wording around things like untrusted or user initiated connections has been removed. So end user devices still need to be well within scope, whereas before you could you could state that there were devices that were out of scope and you didn't really need to go into that much detail around it. Whereas now they want that detail. So the questions and how you answer them, there's got to be a lot more substance around it. If there's anything that you're saying no to, then you're going to really need to justify it, or it will be an automatic fail. So, and certificates and scoping become more transparent. So you can now provide fuller scope descriptions. You can record excluded areas privately. You can name the legal entities in the scope, and you can even request extra entity level certificates within the wider certificate scope, is their official wording. So essentially, you now, rather than just being able to put relatively woolly answers, now you need to give exact depth to why something is either out of scope, or you're stating that it's within scope even though it's not the exact security level, or it's not set up in exactly the way that the certification requires you to do it. So you just need to give a lot more depth and meaning to it. The actual questions themselves have slightly changed, but it shouldn't be too much of a problem. Again, this is where if you're using an IT, a cybersecurity expert or an IT support business that, you know, does a lot of these, then it won't really affect you as the end user getting that certification. So, and then the final bit really is around the cloud services. So the updated requirements define cloud services more clearly and state plainly that if your data or services sit in cloud platforms, the services must be in scope. They cannot be excluded. So this is quite a big shift actually. So say, for example, you're using a main software that your people use day to day, and you're saving data in it. Before, you could actually say, well, most of our data is stored within our main database, and that is cloud hosted and it's managed by X, Y, or Z partner, in which case then it's irrelevant for your cyber essentials. It would be classed as out of scope, whereas now it's not. They've brought it into scope. Similar to if you've got ISO 27001, which again is a cyber security certification, it's around the scoping side of things. So what they've effectively done is they want to know everything that you're using, and they brought it within scope, as opposed to a lot of things you could say was out of scope. So if your business runs on Microsoft 365 and other cloud servers or hosted platforms, they're now part of your assessment story, not outside of it, which before you could effectively just say it was out of scope and it would be fine. You'd move on to the next question. Whereas now you're just going to add those extra details in. And hopefully if you're using, you know, a mainstream partner for these, then it's all taken care of. You'll just need to add the details in. That's all. So it shouldn't really be much of an issue. Whereas if you've got custom written databases, platforms that you built yourself X years ago, then that might be a little bit more tricky for you, because you've effectively now got to include them in the scope and then justify the security and the updates. So it could be a little bit more tricky for you. Again, that's definitely a conversation for another time, but just be careful that cloud services are now in scope as well. So when do you need to act? This is the really important thing. So officially, and this is from the IASME website, their wording is there's 3 situations that you need to understand. So first one is, if you're already certificated now, your current certificate stays valid until its normal expiry date. So let's say you got Cyber Essentials in November 2025, don't need to do anything. November 2026, it's going to be slightly different, and there'll be more questions and things like that to sort out. And as I say, mainly the MFA side of things. But because you know it's coming, I would just say start preparing for it. The next situation is if they renew using an assessment account created before 27th of April 2026. They can still complete that renewal under the old question set, provided they finish within the 6-month assessment window. So at the moment, the way that Cyber Essentials works, again, depending on which platform you buy it through, but the normal way and how Syn-Star works is if you agree for Cyber Essentials, you buy it. Let's say you buy it on today's date, 23rd of March, 2026. You've actually got 1 year to do the assessment. And then as soon as the day you get the assessment and it gets signed off, then your certificate runs from that date. So you've got a 12-month window to get it done. Once it's done, you've got 12 months of certification, and then you'll need to make sure that you've got your certification ready for the following 12 months. What they've basically said is that essential 12-month window is now shortened to 6 months. So if you were to buy it today, you would have a 6-month window to get the certification done with the old answers. And then once your certification is done and submitted and it's all accepted, you've then got 12 months on that certificate. The final one is if they create their renewal assessment account on or after the 27th of April 2026, they will need to meet the new April 2026 rules for that renewal. So essentially, nice and straightforward. If you've currently got Cyber Essentials and your renewal date is after the 27th of April 2026, your new one's going to be the new questions. If you're thinking about getting Cyber Essentials and you were to do it after the 27th of April 2026, then again, it would just be the new questions. Whereas if you were to buy it, let's say this week, and it's before the 27th of April 2026, then you would still go off the old questions, but you've only got a 6-month window in which to complete and get your certificate. So they're the three main things. So hopefully that's been useful in terms of saying what the changes are. There are slight tweaks and changes to some of the other questions, but largely it's very similar to how the previous Cyber Essentials were. Actually, Cyber Essentials update in 2025 was probably one of the biggest updates. Now, we have done a previous webinar on the full Cyber Essentials, a beginner's guide to getting Cyber Essentials. So if you didn't see that and you're interested in watching that, then as I say, you can scan that QR code and it will bring up, as I say, where you can then watch that, or you can send me an email or get in contact with anyone at Syn-Star and we'll be able to send you that link, or you can go onto our learning center and you'll be able to search for Cyber Essentials on there, and you can see some of the different webinars and chats and blogs and things like that we've got all around Cyber Essentials. So, but the big question, the big thing that you really need to understand is what should you do next? So we've broken it down into nice 4 easy areas. So that's how we want to do it now. The 4 main things: turn on multi-factor authentication for every cloud service. That's the really big important one. When we say multi-factor, we're talking about person goes on, they put in their username, normally their email address, a password, and then there's some kind of secondary verification, whether it's using an authenticator app where you log in on your phone, for example, and you get a code, whether you use a PIN code because it texts or WhatsApps you or whatever to your device. If you're using a password manager, then again, you would get the PIN number through that. So it's whatever is an extra step to just a username and a password. That's the big thing. Remember as well, Microsoft are going along the passwordless route, which essentially means soon you won't even need to put in a password on quite a lot of applications. It will be a case of logging in and then doing the multi-factor side of things. But as I say, at the moment, essentially, it's an extra step to just a standard password. Second thing is prove critical patching happens within 14 days. Now, again, this is the prove part. which is making sure that you're scanning and you've got up-to-date reports on your devices. Again, depending on what IT support partner you work with, whether they're sending you reports, whether they're giving you regular updates on those sorts of things. Third is the scope. Now, especially cloud services that you use, because they're now being brought into the scope, remote devices, and also, again, something that is also adjusting on the scope is bring your own device. So this is if you've got users that are using their own device that aren't managed by the business, again, there's going to be a lot more around that. And then the final part is its directions that Cyber Essentials is now more explicit about the ongoing responsibility. So, and again, this is where some people think, oh, well, I do my certification, I've got it for a year, it doesn't really matter, I don't need to worry about keeping all the devices in scope. That's the big difference between Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus. Whereas, as I say, again, they've just reworded a lot of the reasonings and the questions around it. So, you know, there will be adjustments to that as well. So finally, before we go on to our questions and answers, again, do use the chat if you've got any questions. I can see that some have come through as I've been talking. But what would be really great is if you did want to connect, as I say, if you scan that QR code, find me on LinkedIn, always posting different updates and things. But as I say, whether it's myself or Syn-Star, we're on all of the major social media platforms. So do look us up. We're always trying to post important things that businesses need to know around IT and all different facets, not just Cyber Essentials, whether it's cybersecurity, devices, etc., etc. If you do want a cybersecurity review, then as part of a thank you to us for you coming and watching this webinar today, you can reach out to us and we will offer you a free cybersecurity review. So it'd be good for you to reach out for that. And the final part is our Q&A session. So I can see there's a few questions come through. Please do use the chat and I'll answer them as I go along. So question 1 is what evidence must we provide to show timely patching? Right, good answer. So good question. So in terms of that, you can actually list out exactly what versions you're on when you do your certification, and it's just having something in place and explaining what's in place. So whether you get you can apply to things like Microsoft for their automatic alerts, so they'll actually show you what patches are available, which ones are critical, etc. So you can actually demonstrate that you're monitoring that. Or on the flip side, if you've got fully managed devices, then you can get reports through whether it's your IT provider or the platform that looks after your devices. So it really depends on the setup as to how you would explain the timely patching. Again, happy to have a further conversation around that. The next question, what happens if our assessment account is created before the 27th of April? Right, so yeah, as I say, further back when I spoke about, yeah, essentially, if it's coming up right now, then you will still fall under the old questions. Whereas anyone that's after the 27th of April, then it will be the new questions. So yeah, it's going to be similar to what your one last time was, probably. Again, I don't know exactly which sort of list of questions that was. So next question is, does mandatory MFA apply to all users or only admins? And what methods are considered acceptable under version 3.3? They put authenticator, biometric, etc. Yeah, so it's all users is the thing. Every single user that is using your company data. So whether they're a contractor, whether they're employed, if they've got an access account, then it's all users. In terms of the multi-factor, usually authenticator apps are the chosen one, or having password managers. Again, password managers are usually best because you, the company, distribute the password manager. So if you then needed to retract the multi-factor authenticator from that person, then with a password manager that the company control, you can essentially kill that access, which means that that person will no longer have access. Whereas if the authenticator is a private one, that it's the individuals, you may find that you're going to struggle to restrict access for that user because they might be able to get around it and then use the multi-factor. So again, depending on what software it is and how you're doing it at the moment, there's different answers, but definitely all of them are probably acceptable. There's just different things around cybersecurity that you really need to think about. As I say, biometrics, which is fingerprint reader, facial recognition that's off of the device. If it's a company managed device and it's a company managed software, then that'll be perfect for it. So there really are different ones. So right, let's have a look. Right, so we've got a question. IASME use Willow for the assessment. They use Qualsys for vulnerability scanning. Do you provide a solution to scan vulnerabilities to Windows 11 and third-party applications like Adobe browsers, etc.? Yes, we do. Again, there are different ones, but what we would look at first of all is that there are a few different scanners on the market that basically will scan different types of third-party software. And this is where there's a real differentiation between, you've got your Microsoft patches, which again, if you're a and this is Sandip, so it is a client of ours already. So for yours, we will already be looking after your Microsoft patching, all of that side of things, and whether it's your devices, etc. Whereas your third party, which is, as you've listed, things like Adobe, different browsers, etc. Depending on what software you've got, we would look at which one's best to use, because sometimes out of the box they might be doing the updates for certain software, whereas and then with the option that you need to manually create patches and updates for other ones, whereas some are more fixed and restricted. So it really depends on what your software is. So we would just have a look at the whole lot. And then just the final part of the questions, then remediate the devices where critical updates are needed. Would be easier to do this on a 14-day basis to be ready for future ASME scan. Yeah, so the main way of looking at these patches and updates is what you want to, in an ideal situation, you would uniform the software that everyone's using. So for example, browsers, get them all to use Edge, for example, and then we would then make sure that updates and patches are done on all your users for Edge. And the way that it works is a sort of a one-to-many process. So you have the patch assembly line, and the reason I call it assembly line is because obviously depending on how out of date some of your patches are, you may not be able to just push an update. You may need to do a sequence of updates to get them to the latest version. But what you can do is, once you've then created that, and whether it's a script or a process depending on the platform, you would then click a button and essentially it would push out the update to all of your devices. And that's the really important thing. You don't want to be manually going around checking any of these things. So, but as I say, happy to have a sort of a separate conversation about that. Another question from Simon. So do we need to provide authentication? Yes, is the answer. You need to provide the authentication. I think you're talking about the apps. I mean, if you're a Microsoft house, Microsoft user, so you're using 365, etc., then Microsoft Authenticator seems to be the most popular one, and it is the number one for global usage. So what you can do is you can effectively provide that for all of your users. And when they log in to the Microsoft Authenticator, they would use the company email address to do that. So that then you've got the protection that if you need to restrict that user because they leave abruptly, whether it's their choice or yours as the business, you've got control over it and you can restrict that down. So yeah, generally we would say if you want to provide an authenticator, then you're better off to get them to install Microsoft Authenticator. It's free. It's a free app. Use the Microsoft Authenticator and then just make sure that they're logged in using their company email address, not a personal email address. That's the big thing, really. You want to take away the ownership of them and you want it to be by the company itself. Say, for example, we get a similar thing with password managers. A lot of people might use a personal Google password manager because they've got an Android device, and then they'll start mixing in their business passwords with that password manager. The problem is then they're in their personal password manager. They're theirs, not the business's. So again, you just need to be quite careful when it comes to that. But sorry, we're slightly going off topic. Right. So yeah, on their personal, sorry, an extension of the question, on their personal devices. Again, this is what comes under BYOD is the sort of the terminology, which is bring your own device. Yes, again, it's always better to have a clear IT usage policy. And as long as as long as you as the business are comfortable that that device is secure and up to date and you're managing it, in terms of from the security perspective. So you would have a policy, and as long as they're happy to have company software installed on their personal device. But generally, this is where it can get a little bit grey. And this is why actually we would always recommend first and foremost is that you have your team that have got business owned and managed devices. And then there is no grey areas when it comes to security and usage. That's the problem with people using their personal devices. I mean, when it comes to a phone, they don't really need the phone for anything else rather than the authenticator, then that's kind of okay. Whereas when it comes to devices, you don't, if you're not managing that device, they could be on what's called a dirty network. Someone hacks into their device, they then log in to your business network, and that's where the problems can happen. So yeah, generally we would always recommend that you have a business owned device that they use. If you can't for for whatever reason, then yeah, do have a decent IT policy in place where it's really clearly defined who's responsible for what. And that's whether it's making sure that the devices are up to date, the devices are secure, and then you're using, whichever authenticator app, or technology. Again, as I say, texting is fine, but certainly text messages aren't as secure as an authenticator app, because with an authenticator app, it's a multi-factor authentication, but also what's really good is it uses biometrics on the device. So you need to, when the app opens up, the person needs to put their fingerprint in just for the MFA app to open up. Then you do the secondary where you type in the code and it gives you another PIN code. So, there is extra layers using an authenticator app, and that's definitely the one that we would recommend. Another question from Dave is, can you confirm that if a cloud service does not offer MFA, we can still use it? Yes. Essentially, what you would do is in the scoping part of the question, because let's say, for example, the question is, are all your users, etc., using MFA? If you put no, you then need to give a good reason why not. And this is where you would probably just need to detail the software and the version and explain the fact that they don't have it. And in which case, then it would be in scope and you will pass. Obviously, if we talk about a raw nuts and bolts cybersecurity perspective, it's not always great, but it will pass Cyber Essentials. So yeah, you would just put it on the scoping that it's not available, and then it's perfectly fine. So Yeah, hope that answers that one. Right, I think that's all the questions. So I hope you've enjoyed this. If you've got any further questions, anything you want to discuss, whether you are a client or you'd like to possibly be a client of Syn-Star's, then please do reach out and get in contact. And as I say, all of these come into effect 27th of April 2026. Thank you for your time. Enjoy the rest of your day, evening, morning, wherever you are.